Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. What does it take for you to qualify for an income property loan today? And if Donald Trump is reelected, many think that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, those government-backed mortgage loans, will disappear and that fixed-rate mortgages could disappear as well. What would that mean to you today on Get Rich Education? Finally, with Total Control Financial, get checkbook control of your existing 401k and IRA funds to invest in real estate. Yes, you can move your retirement money into your own checking account, but you must avoid the little-known tax that you'll get hammered with in a self-directed IRA. Instead, start your QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Thanks for being here, but you're not here for me. You're here for you, bringing you that weekly dose of real estate abundance. We emphasize direct investment in real estate here. That way you typically have both higher returns and more control. Why don't we talk about real estate light? I'm talking about something like REITs here, real estate investment trusts. Well, REITs behave a lot like stocks. And there's so much administrative and compliance expense and layers of management and advertising and all kinds of overhead. Now, real estate syndication is something that we discuss a little. That's where you and other investors get into not so much a fund, but rather into one specific deal, like one apartment building that has one address or one group of ATMs or even a complex of assisted living homes. That's what real estate syndication means. It's investing alongside others in one specific deal, not a fund. And that's because that deal is so big, or that apartment building is so big, that you wouldn't be able to buy it all yourself. A syndication is more passive than direct investing, and it provides you with less control. They're the trade-offs, and you often don't get a return that's as high either. Then, finally, with direct investing, some might call it turnkey real estate investing, you've got that great control, and you're paid those up to 5 ways simultaneously. Now, within this direct investing, you can either hire out professional management, which takes care of 90, 95, 99% of the hassles for you, or you could get really hands-on and even self-manage where tenants could contact you directly. I don't do that. I do a lot of direct investing with professional management. I've got a life to live here. So at Get Rich Education, I most often discuss direct investing where you are the owner of the property. And I discuss more about professional management than self-management, although we do a little of both, because ultimately it does come back to that ROTI, that question, what's your return on time invested? If you get enough of that income, you might even be able to quit your day job. But even then, there's a lot of passivity, but it's not complete passivity if you're a direct investor with a professional manager. Now, it certainly wouldn't be anything like a 40-hour-a-week job, but maybe an hour or more per week for your ongoing administrative time or scanning a real estate-related tax document or interfacing with your property manager. You don't exactly just sit back and collect the rent checks. Not quite exactly, although you usually don't have to do much more than that because you're a direct investor. And because you're involved without having to be the day-to-day property manager, you know what else this does? This level of control that you have, but yet not having to have that everyday responsibility. And that's a nice position to be in. You have control, but not responsibility. What happens is you become a better investor since you have some level of involvement, but yet not day-to-day responsibility. You learn. That's what you do. Look, if you invest in the S&P 500 and it goes up, you didn't learn anything. You got lucky. You didn't become a better investor at all. And you can run your real estate empire from anywhere on the planet as you don't follow money, but instead you've made money follow you. So that's why we do what we do here. And really, that's the mindset around it. Last year, the Trump administration released its first formal plan to overhaul the housing finance system and begin the process of removing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac from government conservatorship. The plan really wants to reduce the role of the federal government in the housing finance system and help enhance some taxpayer protections. And what they really want to do is increase the role of private sector competition. That's the bottom line. Now, will that ever come to fruition? I don't know. And there's also 7 or 8 months now until the next presidential election cycle here. We've got a great guest today, and she and I won't talk too much about the potential legislative changes here. We'll quickly pivot into how this affects you. Today's guest does such a good job of explaining things. I'll jump into our chat to help clarify some things for you anyway, since this is a primarily educational channel. Let's go. As the president of Ridge Lending Group, this week's guest has spent the last 20 years as a nationwide lender and loan officer. Importantly, she is a real estate investor herself, so she really understands what you need. Her firm specializes in investment property loans, and they have worked with tens of thousands of investors and homeowners all over the country and outside the country, people just like you. In fact, the company she leads, Ridge Lending Group, has helped more people realize financial freedom through real estate than any other mortgage lender in America. She's also done more loans for you, the Get Rich Education listener, than any lender anywhere in the world. In fact, it's where I do my loans. The mortgage that I originated on the last investment property loan that I took out myself was with them. It's great to have back Ridge Lending Group President Caeli Ridge.
Thank you, Keith. I am always so excited to be here with you and your listeners. I've got some great content for everyone today.
Caeli, before we get into what could change, just give us a very quick overview of just generally what it takes to qualify for an income property, down payment, DTI, credit score.
Sure, you bet. As it stands today, and remember everybody, underwriting guidelines can often be a moving target, but today the average for qualifying is going to require 20% down, usually 680 or better credit score, and the reserves need to be a percentage of the unpaid principal balance of the rental property's mortgage that you own. Now, that will change depending on how many finance properties you have, but if you expect the highest end 6% on the unpaid principal balance, plus 6 months of principal, interest, taxes, and insurance on a subject property, those are the reserve requirements. Everything is relatively unchanged from the last 12 months or so.
Okay. And something that could change in the relatively near future are some circumstances around what people call the DTI, which is really the debt to income ratio. Now, we've talked about this on the show before, but just to give a very simple example, your debt to income ratio is the ratio of your minimum monthly debt payments to your monthly gross income. So therefore, if you had $5,000 of monthly debt payments, and that will include the payment minimums on things like your credit cards and your car loan, say that's $5,000, and you divide that by $10,000 of gross monthly income, then your debt to income ratio is 50%. Just to give a very simple example of what that means. So, Caeli, tell us about some of the changes that could be coming, some of which could intersect with the DTI.
So I'm going to start with the up-and-coming regulatory changes, of course, as it applies to our mortgage lending, as we know it today, and of course, what we expect to change or stay the same in the not-too-distant future. So, gang, this might get a little bit wordy, but I think it's important content to share with GRE listeners. To make sense of this topic, I need to go as far back as the 2008-2009 housing and lending crash, one of the worst financial economic catastrophes of this country's history. So post the crash, there was a massive overhaul to the financial sector of the United States, specifically, and most of you have heard this term, Dodd-Frank, or more precisely, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. So just briefly, as a very quick background, former President Barack Obama introduced the proposal. It was Senator Chris Dodd and Congressman Barney Frank that brought it to the United States House of Representatives, and the bill was passed. Two of the more significant regulations within Dodd-Frank are something called QM, qualified mortgage, and ATR, ability to repay. Originally written, QM stipulates that any borrower with over a 43% DTI, debt to income, does not qualify for a conventional loan.
Right.
Quickly adopted is something called the QM patch, because over 50% of all the mortgage origination were to borrowers with over 43% DTI. They had to do something. The patch was established as a temporary fix written to expire January of 2021. Why is this important, or better yet, why am I telling you all this? So gang, while I have no intention of making this a political discussion, the outcome of the patch and what that will mean to US mortgages is entirely political. If Donald Trump is reelected, the patch will expire as planned, 1,000%. There's no conspiracy theory, it's just fact. If the Dems take control of the White House, they will likely stop or postpone the patch expiration because of the impact it will have on housing.
Something that came out of Dodd-Frank was called the CFPB. That's the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. That is a U.S. government agency born in 2011. It's basically just the consumer protection watchdog over banks and mortgage servicing and other operations. So the CFPB set that 43 max DTI. Do I have that right so far, Caeli?
Correct.
But there was an exception for loans sold to Fannie, Freddie. It could exceed 43 such that your DTI could be up to 50. And that condition where your DTI can be up to 50, extended from 43, that is what's called the QM patch. So we think that if Trump's going to be reelected, that condition will expire and you won't be able to get that DTI up to 50. However, if the Democrats win the next election, it seems more likely that this patch will continue and you will therefore be able to have the DTI up to 50.
That is correct. Perfectly said.
Got it. Okay.
So beyond that, I want to share with you guys, most of you listening now will remember that post the 08-09 crash, the only secondary mortgage investors left standing were Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These are what we call GSEs, Government Sponsored Enterprise.
Another acronym.
Yes, another acronym. And for those of you that don't know, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac are publicly traded companies that federally insure mortgage-backed securities, which are tied to what? Real estate, right?
Right.
As publicly traded companies, obviously, investors will put their money in for a return. So in looking at how that correlates with our most prevalent mortgage-backed security, the fixed rate, we'll say specifically a 30-year fixed rate, the average 30-year fixed rates right now for an investment property are in the 4s. Now, whether you think so or not, the reality is that's an almost obscenely low fixed for 30 years interest rate.
It is amazing.
Very, very low, yes. So why do we think that is? Well, I'll tell you, it's because the United States government has insured that loan against default. As an investor buying federally insured mortgage-backed securities, that's a pretty safe bet. Without that insurance, one, you probably won't see a fixed rate mortgage, aka like the rest of the world. And two, even if we had a fixed rate option, without the federal insurance, I can tell you for sure, guys, it certainly won't be at a rate of 4%.
Right. We can almost certainly think that it's going to be higher, and that is probably because the banks need to price in a risk premium since they don't have that backstop. Therefore, they would need to charge more in interest.
In the event of default, exactly right. Yes. So now let me take you back to the patch and what happens if it expires or if it's extended. If the patch expires as planned, if Trump gets reelected, Fannie and Freddie insured loans are going away, everyone. They just are. They will become privatized, and what we call today non-QM loans will be mainstream. And as such, adjustable rate mortgages or ARMs will become the norm again. Now hold on, before anyone fears the sky is falling, let me offer some perspective. The truth of the matter is, the mass appeal of the fixed rate mortgage product is almost entirely psychological. It's true. I've suffered from the same condition. The reality is the average lifespan of a 30-year fixed mortgage today is only 7.4 years.
Yeah, that's a great stat.
Yeah, listen to this. Less than 1% of all 30-year fixed loans live to see the full 30 years.
That is astounding. I would have guessed it were less than 10%, but not as low as 1% that the 30-year loan actually extends all the way through to 30 years. That payment in the 360th month.
Exactly. A lot of people are shocked by that statistic. Another thing to consider, everyone, is that ARMs, if they are to again become a norm, we can expect what's called an inverted yield to turn the corner, where the ARM rates are again traditionally 1 percentage point or better or lower than a fixed rate mortgage. So put all of that into perspective as we start thinking about what potential outcomes we may be facing in, well, just about a year's time, based on some variables that we just can't predict right now, especially with everything that's currently going on. If the patch is extended, then I can simply say that at least for the interim, it should be business as normal or as usual, TBD.
All right. And again, the patch being extended, meaning that there would be that federal government backstop and we could get debt to income ratios up to 50 rather than 43. I want to ask you more about fixed versus adjustable rate mortgages here in just a moment, but I think it can actually be difficult to remember why the QM patch would expire if Trump's reelected, because that would mean that you couldn't get DTIs up to 50 anymore if Trump were reelected, if we're assuming that that would happen. I think that's difficult to remember because we think of Trump as the real estate president, but yet real estate lending would be more restrictive if he were reelected. So why would that be?
Well, it's going to be more about privatizing Fannie Freddie. He wants, more than anything, the White House with Trump in it, they want Wall Street to have their shot at mortgage-backed securities again, is the simple way to answer that question.
That's the way to think about it, because if you think of Trump and his stance and his party as the more capitalistic one, you want to take things out of the public sector and more into the private sector. That might be a way to remember this. Caeli and I are going to come back and talk more about the difference between fixed rate mortgages and adjustable rate mortgages and more. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Ridge Lending Group President Caeli Ridge. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Countless property investors get killed with maintenance costs, but that's far less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model where you can invest in new construction, turnkey rental properties. That's why JWB was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. To learn more and see inventory, go to newconstructionturnkey.com. The company that's provided our listeners with more loans than anyone is Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. You can finance more than 10 single families up to fourplexes. Serving most U.S. states, their knowledge and experience leads to your financial freedom. They're number one in the investment space. Pre-qualify and then chat with President Caeli Ridge personally. Start on your next investment property loan right now at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Richard Duncan, publisher of Macro Watch. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking with Caeli Ridge, the president of Ridge Lending Group. We've been talking about potential legislative changes and how that could affect the lending landscape in the future and your ability to get a loan. Caeli, why don't we compare and contrast fixed rate mortgages versus adjustable rate mortgages? But before we do, give a reminder again, if what happens exactly that would make it more likely that the fixed rate would either go away or become less favorable?
It's very likely that if the Republicans stay in the White House, fixed rates will be a thing of the past and or a lot less desirable than if the Democrats take the House in the election this year. Fixed rates will probably stay status quo for the time being.
This would be a substantial change, and I think an investor needs to tweak their mindset. For example, you as an investor, you probably have fixed rate loans on most of or all of your properties. So you've been used to having that same interest rate for the life of your loan. Oftentimes you may not understand that you're paying a premium for that 30-year certainty, but your principal and interest payment does not change. So with ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages, it's different. Now we're talking about a loan with an interest rate that can change periodically. You've got a lower rate, but if you've got a lower rate, therefore it probably makes it easier to qualify with an ARM, at least to get in the beginning.
That's true. Yeah. As it relates to the debt to income ratio calculation, the new mortgage payment that you are securing on this rental property is going to have an impact on how the DTI is calculated. If I were to otherwise comment on some of the differences between, play devil's advocate, 30-year fixed and an adjustable rate mortgage, we had mentioned earlier, a 30-year fixed mortgage is conservative as it gets.
Yeah.
A lot of people really focus, and I feel like kind of are conditioned to only want the 30-year fixed. I understand that, and it is extremely secure. You will pay a higher interest rate if we see that paradigm shift. And remember this too, you guys, over 30 years, if anyone has ever really taken the time to look at their mortgage documents at the closing table, pay attention to the amount of interest that you end up paying for that low fixed rate if you pay it for 30 years. It's very often double what your original principal balance was versus if we look at the adjustable rate mortgage, and I'm not selling anybody on one or the other, just again, trying to play devil's advocate. If you look at the adjustable rate mortgage and continue to utilize that vehicle in the lower interest rate for your investment properties, you're going to be able to choose between, say, a 5-year ARM, where the interest rate is fixed for 5 years before it can change, or a 7-year, maybe it's a 3-year, where again, the interest rate does not change for that period of time. And after that fixed period of time, what will happen is the interest rate will adjust based on predetermined caps. Now, I don't know if you want me to get into any of that, Keith, but you have some protection in terms of how high an initial rate adjustment can be. There are also life caps associated with adjustable rate mortgages that deem a rate can never exceed a certain percentage point over the original interest rate that you lock in on.
That is very well said. So ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages, often have caps. And like Caeli mentioned, is even ARMs have a fixed interest rate period in the beginning in most cases. So for example, you might see out there a 5/1 ARM. That's how it's written. And that's the most popular adjustable rate mortgage, the 5/1 ARM. And what does that 5/1 mean? Like Caeli touched on, the introductory rate then lasts for 5 years. That is the 5 in the 5/1. And then after that, the interest rate can change once a year. That's the 1 in the 5/1.
Exactly. Perfect. Yes. And the caps associated with that will tell us how much the initial rate can increase in that first rate adjustment and each subsequent rate adjustment, if it's once a year, and then it will have a life cap. So just quickly, let's say the rate caps on a 5-year 5/1 ARM are 225. That means that in rate adjustment number 1, if you started with a 4% interest rate, it could not exceed a 6% or 2% on top of the 4 jump. Right. Each year subsequent to that on the anniversary, an additional 2 points, cannot exceed any 2 points after that with a life cap of 5. The life cap of 5, meaning again, if you started at 4% plus 5 is 9%. That is as high as that rate could ever go should you decide to keep that loan for the full 30 years. Because even though it's a 5/1 ARM, it's still amortized over a 30-year period of time. You could theoretically continue to, just based on a 9% cap, keep that mortgage if you wanted to.
So I think listening here, you probably understand that the biggest con, the greatest negative with the ARM is that your rates and your payments can rise significantly over the life of the loan, and you could experience some payment shock if you get stung or you guess wrong or you have some surprise come up. But the big pro is if the ARM saves you, say, $200 a month over the fixed rate, you can invest that $200 a month elsewhere. And even within an ARM, you do have a fixed period in the beginning. So it's about you as an investor knowing what you want, knowing what your confidence level is, guessing where you think the economy is going to go if you want to play the guessing game or get that fixed rate certainty if that option continues to be there, which we think it may not be if Trump gets reelected. The other advantage of the ARM is that as a borrower, you can take advantage of falling rates without refinancing. If rates would fall further, you don't have to pay a whole new set of closing costs and fees. So ARM borrowers can just sit back. You can watch your rate, your monthly payment fall.
I would tell you that is absolutely true. And in fact, most people that weathered any sort of storm post 0809 that were in an adjustable rate mortgage were able to take advantage of that. In fact, take great advantage of that because at the time, the adjustable rate mortgages did not come with a floor rate, right? So you have the life cap that says you can't exceed X, but at the time those loans were written, it did not come with an interest rate that you couldn't go below. So people were able to really take advantage of rates that went as low as 1.5%, 2%. The other thing, real quick, Keith, I wanted to comment on, it's important to remember, everybody, that if in a market with increasing interest rates, remember, as real estate investors, what will happen to our rents? They will start to increase as a result of a rising interest rate market. Now, they won't be instantaneous.
Right.
It'll probably take, 6, 8, 9 months for them to catch up. But inevitably, that's what we see happen. When rates rise, we see rents go up as well.
Right. And yes, there would be that substantial lag effect, rents rising significantly after interest rates go up. And the short story for that is that people that are just kind of on the brink of getting in the home buyer pool and want to buy their first place get knocked out of it with that higher interest rate. They could no longer qualify. Therefore, that increases demand within the renter pool. Now, we mentioned it DTI earlier, that debt to income ratio, where I gave that example where if a borrower has $5,000 worth of monthly debt payments divided by $10,000 of monthly gross income, they have a DTI of 50%. From there, in using that as an example, when a borrower would say a 50% DTI, what if they take out a loan for a property? So now they have a mortgage payment on a property, but they also have this income and this cash flow from the property. How would that affect the borrower with a 50% DTI?
Well, the answer is going to differ slightly depending on if we're talking about a cash out refinance or a purchase. Focusing on a purchase, the good news is that the assumptive rents, right, even if it's not leased, as a lender, we'll take the appraisal of an investment property to determine a median of rents for such a property and give the individual 75% of that gross rent number to offset this new mortgage payment, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. I can share with everybody that particular formula, 75% of the gross rents on an investment purchase offsetting the new mortgage payment will always be a positive number. To what degree positive obviously depends on the property and the market, et cetera. But that will be to the borrower's debt to income ratio advantage. Think about that for a minute. If we have gross rents of $1,000 a month on our investment purchase and our proposed PITI is $500 a month, I'm going to give the individual 75% of $1,000, that's $750 of income. From that number, I have to back out the $500, but that leaves us a $250 positive number, right?
Right.
The $250 positive now goes into the income column. We have actually reduced the individual's debt to income ratio in that scenario as a result of buying this investment property. Again, to what degree positive depends on the property, but it will be a positive, whether it's $1 or $250, it's going to be to our advantage. And that's on a purchase.
Go ahead and tell us about what would happen to one's DTI in this case if they were to do a refinance rather than a purchase.
Sure. Now, there's two answers. I think I'm just going to focus on one because the other one's way too complicated. If the refinance is related to a property that was acquired in what we call the acquisition year, which simply means before it is landed on a Schedule E, then the same rule applies with the exception that we can no longer use an appraisal to deem the rental income, we must show a lease as the borrower. Our borrower is now the official owner of that property, but the same rule applies.
Well, Caeli, you've really been a leader in helping ensure everyday people qualify for income property loans. You're a leader in explaining and educating. If someone wants to learn more, what's the best thing for them to do?
They have several options to reach out to us. They can check out our website, www.ridgelendinggroup.com. They can call us toll-free 855-74-RIDGE is an easy way to remember, or they can email us info@ridgelendinggroup.com.
Caeli Ridge, it's been great clarifying some of these things. We'll see what happens in the next election cycle as well. Thanks so much for coming back onto the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great nutrient-dense material from Caeli as usual. Now, no matter where you originate a loan for your next property, whether that's a primary residence or an income property, let's be frank about something. No borrower is going to be in love with the process of supplying your mortgage loan underwriting with all of the necessary documents to qualify. You do need to show that you have a real income with real reserves and a real credit score, but you don't need too high of a credit score. All right, no one's in love with this process, though. But there's a reward here. You're doing it for the leverage. As you know, the wealth-building benefits of leverage even crush that of compound interest, and you're also pretty likely to get a great interest rate as a reward. You know what they say, right? Banks will give you a loan once you can prove that you don't need it. So let's review some more of what we've learned here. For you to qualify for an income property loan today with the best rates and terms, a conventional loan, it still takes a 20% down payment. If Trump is reelected this coming November, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are more likely to disappear. The debt-to-income ratio maximum threshold would be lowered, perhaps 50 down to 43, and even the fixed rate might go away. Oppositely, if Democrats win the presidential election come this November, it's more likely that Fannie and Freddie will remain intact. DTI thresholds could even remain at 50% maximum for those Fannie Freddie-backed loans, and it would increase the chances that the fixed-rate mortgage sticks around. We also learned that with an additional cash-flowing property added to your portfolio, your debt-to-income ratio often improves. Now, personally, I don't think that Trump will let real estate destabilize for any reason whatsoever, because in the past, even what I'll call quote-unquote regular presidents, they knew how important housing was to the economy. So a quote-unquote real estate president like Trump is even more likely to lend support to real estate's interests, whether you like Trump or not. If there are substantial changes imminent after the election near the end of this year, of course, I'm going to be here for you again, probably with Caeli, to help you navigate how that would look. One other thing to appreciate about Caeli at Ridge Lending Group is that she helps support this show. You've probably heard their spot play on the show here for years. So she helps ensure that my slack-jawed operation makes it to the microphone every week. So when you're getting your next loan into qualification there at Ridge, you might just let her know that you appreciate her supporting GRE. Ridge is the same place that I did my last loan, and my loan before that one too. You can get started at ridgelendinggroup.com. Until next week, I'm Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.